There are stories that sound too unbelievable to be true. Stories of secret experiments, hidden surveillance, government operations carried out behind closed doors. For years, some were dismissed as conspiracy theories. But history has a strange way of revealing what was hidden. Sometimes, the truth doesn't arrive through a confession. It arrives through a forgotten document, a declassified file, or an investigation that finally breaks through the silence. And when the documents appeared, some of the stories people once called impossible were no longer theories. They were history. During the Cold War, American intelligence agencies were deeply concerned about the possibility of psychological manipulation. The question was frightening. Could the human mind be manipulated? In 1953, the CIA began a secret program that would become known as MK-ULTRA. The program involved research into drugs, behavioral modification, and interrogation techniques. Much of the program remained hidden for years. Then came the investigations of the 1970s. The Senate began examining CIA activities. And in 1977, investigators discovered boxes of financial records that had escaped an earlier destruction of MK-ULTRA records. Those surviving records documented numerous sub-projects. CIA. What had sounded like the plot of a fictional thriller had become part of the historical record. MK-ULTRA was real. But the surviving documents were only fragments of a much larger story. The next story wasn't about foreign enemies. It was happening inside the United States. In 1956, the FBI began a program known as COINTELPRO, the counterintelligence program. It initially targeted the Communist Party, but was later expanded to include other domestic organizations. FBI. The program involved infiltration, intelligence gathering, and attempts to disrupt organizations. Then, in 1971, something unexpected happened. An FBI office in Media, Pennsylvania was burglarized. Documents were stolen, and those documents eventually reached journalists and politicians. Suddenly, the existence of COINTELPRO was no longer buried inside government files. The FBI itself acknowledges that some of the program's tactics went too far, and that it was later criticized for violating constitutional rights. FBI COINTELPRO operations were officially ended in 1971. What had been secret was now public. Some stories are disturbing because they actually happened. Others are disturbing because they were proposed. During the Cold War, American officials considered ways of creating public support for military action against Cuba. Among the proposals was a plan later known as Operation Northwoods. The documents contained proposals for staged incidents that could have been used to justify military intervention. But there is an important distinction. The plan was not carried out, and that distinction matters. Operation Northwoods is evidence of what officials proposed, not evidence that those events actually happened. Yet the existence of the documents raises a remarkable historical question. How many ideas discussed behind closed doors never became reality? In 1932, the U.S. Public Health Service began a medical study in Tuskegee, Alabama. 600 black men were enrolled. 399 had syphilis, while 201 did not. CDC STACS participants were not properly informed about the nature of the study. They were told they were being treated for what was described locally as bad blood. The study continued for decades. Even after effective treatment became available, the men were not properly offered the treatment they should have received. Eventually, the study became a national scandal. The Tuskegee study is not a conspiracy theory. It is documented history, and its legacy helped expose the devastating consequences of conducting medical research without informed consent. When World War II ended, America and the Soviet Union entered a new struggle. It was called the Cold War. But the battlefield wasn't only Europe. It was also science. Intelligence officials wanted knowledge that could give America an advantage. Through a program that became known as Operation Paperclip, German and Austrian scientists, engineers, and technicians were brought to the United States. National Archives records document the program and its files. National Archives +1. Some of those recruited had connections to the Nazi regime. Their expertise was considered strategically valuable. The story creates an uncomfortable question. After defeating an enemy, how far should a government go to obtain its knowledge? Paperclip shows that history is rarely divided neatly between heroes and villains. Sometimes the decisions made after a war can be almost as complicated as the war itself. Long before smartphones and social media, governments were already interested in communications. During the Cold War, intelligence agencies developed enormous systems for collecting and analyzing information. Some programs remained classified for decades. Others eventually became subjects of congressional investigations and historical research. The NSA's own historical archives now document the agency's cryptologic history and the evolution of its intelligence work. National Security Agency. The lesson is not that every rumor about surveillance is true. The lesson is more complicated. Governments really have operated secret intelligence programs, and sometimes the public only learns about them years later. June 1972. 5 men were arrested inside the Democratic National Committee headquarters at the Watergate complex. At first, it looked like a strange political burglary. But the investigation would grow into one of the biggest political scandals in American history. The FBI played a major role in investigating the affair. FBI investigations eventually uncovered a much larger web of political wrongdoing. The scandal reached the highest levels of government. And in August 1974, President Richard Nixon resigned. Watergate became a powerful lesson. A secret can remain hidden for a while. But when evidence begins connecting the pieces, the story can become impossible to contain. So what do these stories really tell us? Not that every conspiracy theory is true. Quite the opposite. They teach us to ask for evidence. MK-ULTRA was documented. COINTELPRO was documented. Tuskegee was documented. Paperclip was documented. Watergate was investigated. And Operation Northwoods was documented as a proposal, but never carried out. The difference between history and conspiracy isn't simply how shocking a story sounds. It is the evidence behind it. Because sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction. But the truth doesn't need exaggeration. It only needs to be uncovered. This is Forgotten Codex. And some secrets were never meant to be forgotten.